Hi, I recommend exploring this model, Advanced Lesson 3 Financial Statement Model, in detail yourselves, but it might be helpful for me to give you a quick guided tour on the key elements initially. So first of all, on the mapping page, we have a mapping switch, which allows us, you'll see how this works in a minute. Then we have the balance sheet line names, how that rolls up into its subtotals, and a unique line number. We have the cash flow line names, again, how those roll up into the subtotals, and over here the different mappings, and we have 3 different mappings which we can switch between using the mapping switch, which was at the top, using a quite straightforward index as we would have done before for scenarios. And then we also have the profit and loss line names, its subtotals, sections, and again how that maps onto the balance sheet. So how does this work? If we go to the data tab, what I have here is, assume this has been already calculated in a fully robust model, all the cash flow lines for this business, and here I've got all the profit and loss lines for this business. In this case these are inputs, but usually these would have been calculated in your model and just brought onto this page data, where we're going to calculate the financial statements. We keep the display of the financial statements separate. Now for each cash flow line we have a balance sheet mapping line, here you go, and then we use this to aggregate all the cash flow lines into whichever balance sheet line they need to go to. So here are the lines, here's the mapping, and we use a very simple sum if here to aggregate all the lines that need to go to, for example, fixed assets net book value. Notice here that the bottom line of the cash flow, net results after shareholder receipts, which is the aggregation of everything in the cash flow, is also mapped, and that's mapped to line 1007, which is mapped to cash. And notice here that the sum is not a straightforward sum, it's the negative of the sum. This is in order to keep the calculations as clean as possible. And then we do the same thing for the profit and loss. We've got all our profit and loss lines, we've got their mapping onto the balance sheet, we aggregate them into their balance sheet lines, and we also aggregate retained earnings onto line 1013. No surprises here, that's going to profit and loss reserve account at the bottom. And again, this is a sum and it's a negative sum. Then very simply, to calculate the balance sheet, we say the balance sheet is equal to the previous period minus the cash position plus the P&L position. So there's minus the cash plus the P&L. And that's it. Your balance sheet is generated and it balances. So what's great about this approach is that it allows you to change the mapping without having to change how the calculation engine works, and without changing how the financial statements are displayed, which I'll show you in a moment. So if I go back to the mapping page, here at the moment I've got a simple mapping where we go to trade debtors and other debtors. Here, trade and other debtors. But if I change this to 2, I've got a much simpler balance sheet where everything just goes to debtors regardless, and it goes to a single reserve account, and here everything goes to debtors. And this is picked up on the calculation page, run through, calculates the balance sheet, so now we have a balance sheet that looks different but still balances. Or we can go to a more complicated balance sheet where we're mapping to both trade debtors and other debtors, and we're splitting the movements between a reserve account maintenance and a reserve account debt. Here again, trade debtors, other debtors. And when I go over here, the balance sheet still balances. So how do I display these? This is all very well and good for calculating your financial statement. And to be fair, it doesn't look terrible, but it might not be something you want to print out. I then have 3 very simple but nicely laid out statements which have a very clear look and feel about them. So there's a cash flow statement, profit and loss statement, balance sheet statement, and these can be done in exactly the format that your boss wants to see them in, but what's nice about this is it's separated from the calculation, so you can change the calculation without having to go and change how these look. That's it for the guided tour of this file. I recommend going through it in a bit more detail yourselves and giving the assignment a go.